The Mongols never lost a siege they committed to. Baghdad fell. Kiev fell. Zhengdu fell. 40 years of unbroken conquest across 2 continents, and every time, the pattern was identical. The Mongols arrived. They waited. And eventually, the walls came down. But in the winter of 1232, outside the northern Chinese city of Kaifeng, the pattern broke. Not from a relief army, not from weather, not from any failure of Mongol will or logistics or planning. The Jin defenders of Kaifeng had found something no army in history had ever deployed at scale. A weapon that didn't cut, pierce, or bludgeon. A weapon that killed at a distance with fragments too fast to see, by a force so alien the soldiers it killed had no word for what was happening to them. The Mongols had systematic countermeasures for arrows, stones, fire, and tunneling. They had engineered solutions to every fortification problem the medieval world had produced. They had no answer for this. Nobody did. Because nobody had seen it before. The Mongol siege engineer is hauling a wooden mantlet toward the base of Kaifeng's eastern wall when the sky cracks apart. Not thunder. Not trebuchet stone shattering against parapet. A detonation so concussive it seems to collapse the air itself, punching through his chest before his ears register the sound. The ground around him erupts. Dirt, stone, jagged shards of hot iron screaming outward in every direction. 3 men to his left simply cease to exist as recognizable human shapes. The mantlet, oxhide stretched over timber framing, engineered to deflect arrows and absorb boiling oil, is shredded open as though clawed apart by something invisible. He staggers backward. His face is burned. He tastes sulfur and something acrid, chemical, entirely alien to any battlefield he has known. Smoke rises from a shallow crater where 4 soldiers have been preparing a scaling ladder. He has besieged cities across northern China. He has a mental catalog of every weapon a desperate garrison might deploy. Nothing in that catalog explains what just hit him. From the top of Kaifeng's wall, 40 feet above, a Jin dynasty soldier lights another fuse. That detonation was the first explosive fragmentation weapon ever deployed in recorded warfare. The dynasty that built it would be dead within 2 years. But the weapon, and what the Mongols did with it next, would reshape every war fought for the next 8 centuries. Before we go deeper into the siege of Kaifeng, drop a comment below and tell me where you are watching from, and what time it is in your area. And don't forget to smash that subscribe button, because this story is about to go very deep. In 1232, the Mongol Empire was the most efficient killing machine in human history. Not the largest army, not the most numerous, the most efficient. Their siege methodology had been refined across 25 years of continuous imperial conquest. The formula never varied. Surround the city, cut every supply line, deploy captured engineers to build siege engines from local timber, undermine walls with tunneling crews drawn from conquered populations, bombard relentlessly, and starve methodically. Offer surrender terms exactly once. Destroy everything if refused. The formula had not failed across 2 continents. Not once. The Jin dynasty understood they were dying. The Mongols had been dismantling Jin territory since Genghis Khan's first invasion in 1211, consuming northern China province by province over 2 decades. By 1232, the Jin controlled little beyond Kaifeng itself and a shrinking ring of satellite cities. Their field armies had been broken in a series of catastrophic defeats across the Yellow River Plain. Emperor Aizong presided over a court paralyzed by desperation and factional collapse. Kaifeng's garrison, estimated at between 30,000 and 40,000 defenders by contemporary sources, was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and strategically without hope. But inside the walls, Jin military engineers had spent years developing something the world had never seen deployed at scale. The Chinese had known gunpowder for 3 centuries before Kaifeng. Tang dynasty alchemists searching for immortality elixirs had documented incendiary mixtures of saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal as early as the 9th century. By the 10th century, Song armies were attaching small incendiary packets to arrow shafts. Fire arrows designed to ignite wooden structures rather than kill soldiers. These were nuisance weapons, useful against supply depots and wooden fortifications. Strategically marginal, They didn't breach walls. They didn't shatter formations. They didn't kill armored soldiers with reliable consistency. For 200 years, gunpowder occupied the margins of Chinese warfare, an incendiary curiosity rather than a decisive technology. The Jin engineers at Kaifeng crossed a different threshold entirely. They moved from incendiary novelty to explosive anti-personnel weaponry, and they did it under the specific pressure of imminent annihilation, solving an immediate tactical problem rather than pursuing theoretical progress. This is how most transformative military technology actually emerges. Not from peacetime research programs, from engineers with their backs against the wall, working against a deadline measured in hours. The primary weapon was the Zhentian Lei, the heaven-shaking thunder bomb. The official Jin history, compiled decades later from surviving records, describes it with precision. An iron casing roughly the size of a large bowl, packed tightly with a gunpowder composition refined specifically for explosive force rather than combustion. A fuse protruding from the top. When ignited and hurled from the walls, by hand, by lever, or launched from small trebuchets, the iron shell detonated on impact or after a short delay, fragmenting the casing into jagged shrapnel that killed and maimed at radius. The Jin history records that the blast could be heard from over 30 li, roughly 10 miles from the walls. The explosion created craters in packed earth. Surviving Mongol accounts describe soldiers torn apart not by any visible projectile, but by an invisible force that shredded flesh with fragments moving too fast to track. No medieval weapon had previously achieved this. An arrow you could see, a stone you could hear approaching. The thunder bomb gave you nothing. One moment the men beside you existed, then they didn't. The psychological effect compounded the physical casualties in ways the Mongol command structure had not anticipated. These were soldiers conditioned across decades of warfare to face every conventional threat the 13th century could produce. Arrow storms, boiling oil, burning pitch, collapsing siege towers. The bombs unmade, that conditioning with a single detonation. Veteran Mongol units that had never retreated from conventional fortification defense broke formation and fell back in visible disorder when the Zhentian Lei detonated among them. But the thunder bomb was not the only weapon on Kaifeng's walls. Jin defenders simultaneously deployed the Hu Qiang, the fire lance. If the thunder crash bomb was the direct ancestor of the hand grenade and the artillery shell, the fire lance was the ancestor of the gun. A bamboo or reinforced paper tube packed with gunpowder attached to the end of a conventional spear. When ignited, it projected a jet of flame, sparks, and small projectiles. Iron pellets, broken pottery, even sand, at close range. Effective distance was limited, perhaps 10 to 15 feet. But at the base of a wall where Mongol soldiers clustered with scaling ladders, 15 feet was more than sufficient. A line of defenders wielding fire lances along a parapet created a continuous curtain of flame and shrapnel that made the wall's base functionally unapproachable during any direct assault. Some sources describe a more advanced variant deployed during the siege, a weapon firing a single larger projectile from a reinforced metal tube with force sufficient to penetrate leather armor. If accurate, this was the first firearm ever documented in human history. Not born from a laboratory, born from the desperate arithmetic of engineers defending a city they already knew was likely to fall. The Mongols did what they always did. They adapted. Their operational DNA was built for learning under pressure. They constructed massive water-soaked oxhide shields to absorb blast and flame. They dug approach trenches, a technique learned from Chinese siege methods, to protect infantry during wall advances. They adjusted assault timing to rain and overcast nights when fuse reliability dropped and gunpowder's effectiveness diminished. Mongol commanders analyzed each new weapon with the same clinical pragmatism they applied to every military technology they encountered from conquered peoples. And still the weapons held. For months, Kaifeng's defenders used their gunpowder arsenal to repel assault after assault, inflicting casualties at rates the Mongol command found operationally unacceptable. The Jin history records single engagements where thunder crash bombs broke massed infantry charges entirely, scattering veteran units that had never before retreated from a fortification defense. One account describes a single Zhentian Lei detonating inside a Mongol siege tower packed with soldiers, killing everyone inside and igniting the structure. Another records fire, lances deployed, in coordinated volleys along a breach in the eastern wall, holding the gap for hours, until repair crews could fill it with rubble. The Mongols could not break Kaifeng by direct assault while gunpowder weapons defended it, so they fell back to the weapon that had never failed any army patient enough to use it: starvation. They sealed every supply route. No grain convoys, no reinforcements, no relief army, because there was no Jin relief army left to send. The Mongol cordon tightened across the surrounding countryside, systematically destroying every agricultural resource within foraging distance. Inside Kaifeng, the population had swollen with refugees from conquered Jin territories. Contemporary sources estimate over 1 million civilians trapped behind the walls alongside the garrison. Granaries that might have fed the pre-war population for months disappeared in weeks. Disease followed hunger. Plague, accelerated by overcrowding, malnutrition, and the accumulating dead, swept through streets where bodies lay too numerous to bury. Defenders too weakened to lift the iron-cased thunder bombs that had held the Mongols back for months. Kaifeng surrendered in 1233. The Jin dynasty ended. Emperor Aizong fled south to Keizhou, where Mongol and Song forces destroyed the last Jin remnant in February 1234. The dynasty that had invented history's first explosive anti-personnel weapons was dead within 2 years of deploying them. But the weapons survived. This is where the significance outgrows the siege entirely. The Mongols absorbed the technology with the same systematic efficiency they applied to every innovation encountered through conquest. Gunpowder engineers captured at Kaifeng were integrated into the Mongol military apparatus. Mongol armies besieging the southern Song in the following decades deployed gunpowder weapons offensively, converting the Jin's desperate defensive innovation into an instrument of the next wave of conquest. When Mongol forces invaded Japan in 1274 and 1281, Japanese sources describe Tetsuhao, explosive bombs launched by Mongol catapults, as terrifying. Alien weapons that shattered samurai formations with no preparation or psychological framework to process what was happening to them. The knowledge traveled west, along Mongol trade networks and military campaigns, through the Islamic world, and eventually into Europe. By the early 14th century, European manuscripts were documenting gunpowder formulations. By the mid-1300s, primitive cannons appeared on European battlefields. By the 15th century, gunpowder artillery had shattered the feudal castle system that had dominated European warfare for 5 centuries. The stone keep, the curtain wall, the fortified gatehouse, all functionally obsolete within decades of cannon proliferation. The knight in plate armor, the defining military figure of the European Middle Ages, became a battlefield anachronism. Every artillery bombardment in European history traces back here. Every musket volley, every cannon broadside, every rifle round fired at Gettysburg, the Somme, Stalingrad, Normandy. The genealogy of every explosive weapon ever deployed runs through an unbroken chain of adoption and refinement back to the moment when Jin engineers packed gunpowder into iron casings and threw them from the walls of a dying city. The irony is structurally perfect. The Jin developed these weapons specifically to stop the Mongol Empire. They failed. Kaifeng fell. The dynasty was erased. But by conquering the innovators, the Mongols inherited the innovation and distributed it across the largest contiguous land empire in history. The technology designed to halt Mongol expansion became one of the primary instruments of their global reach, traveling outward until it ignited a revolution in warfare that would eventually render the Mongol cavalry army itself permanently obsolete. The Jin engineers at Kaifeng were not visionaries constructing the future. They were men trying to survive the next assault. They packed iron shells with refined powder and lit fuses because arrows and boiling oil were no longer enough to hold walls against the most effective siege army the planet had ever produced. They bought months. The Mongols took the city anyway. But the iron bomb outlived the empire that built it. It outlived the empire that conquered it. It outlived every dynasty, khanate, and republic that touched it across 8 centuries. The desperate invention of doomed engineers became the single most consequential weapons technology in human history. Sometimes, the thing that changes everything isn't born from genius seeking progress. It's born from genius with its back against the wall, solving a